After being gone for a week, my husband's on a 6-hour flight back home. And what better way to surprise him than with some fresh vanilla ice cream and some gooey chocolate brownies. I started making my custard for my ice cream with some milk, vanilla, sugar, and some eggs. I combined my egg yolks with my sugar and then slowly put some of the warm milk in there just to get it warm, and then added it to the rest of my milk. Strained all the vanilla out and then let it come down to room temperature before transferring it over to the fridge. In the meantime, I started on my brownie batter, mixed all of my dry ingredients, and then added my wet ones, which were some eggs, some oil, and some water. I then combined that mixture with my dry ingredients, gave it a really good mix, and then transferred that over to my loaf pan before putting that in the oven. Then I pulled out my custard and churned it. When it hit the consistency of soft serve, I transferred it over to a separate container to pop it in the freezer for a couple hours. At this point, my brownie was good to go, so I pulled it out of the oven and let it cool completely. And then my husband walked through the door, so I decided to serve him up some of that brownie and ice cream. This is one of his favorite sweet treats, so I'm excited that he really liked it. Let's make some lasagna from scratch. It was a gloomy day outside, so what better way to spend it than cooking a comforting meal? I started off by making my mozzarella cheese. I added some milk, citric acid, and rennet to my pot, let that sit, and then sliced it all up. Transferred my curds to a cheesecloth to let all the whey drain out. Let that sit for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then when all the whey was drained out, I added it back to the pot with my heated up whey and stretched it. Once it was shiny and smooth, I formed it into a ball and placed that in some cold water. Then I made a really simple pasta dough with some eggs, flour, olive oil, and salt. Kneaded that until it was all smooth, and then wrapped it in some plastic wrap to rest for about 30 minutes to an hour. My favorite part of cooking any meal is chopping, so we started chopping up some carrots really finely, some celery, and some onion. You can use purple onion or white onion. I just love a good purple onion. And then I brown my meat in my Dutch oven, add my vegetables, some tomato paste, some crushed tomatoes, and some herbs. I let that simmer for about 30 minutes to 45 while I prep my lasagna sheets. I cut my dough into 8 pieces and then rolled them out into rectangles. When it was about time to assemble, I made a quick bechamel sauce to go in between my layers, and then started putting it all together. I put down a layer of the ragu, some bechamel, then my lasagna sheets, and then kept repeating that until I reached the top. At this point, I took my mozzarella, sliced it up, and layered it on top. I decided to only do one layer, but feel free to add any other cheese that you want. And then I popped that in the oven for 35 minutes and pulled it out, and it came out so perfect. But since I couldn't wait, I burnt my tongue with that first bite. Here's all the food I made my husband for Super Bowl Sunday. I started off by making myself a blueberry thyme mocktail, and then I pickled some green cabbage, so I sliced it really finely with my mandolin, added some jalapenos, and then topped it with my vinegar mixture. I had my dough rising for a couple hours since I was making some burger buns. I cut those up and then formed those into little balls and let those rise for another 1 to 2 hours, just until they were soft. In the meantime, I got started on making some pretzel bites. He absolutely loves pretzel bites, so I knew that these had to be on the menu for tonight. So I made the dough, covered that until the gluten relaxed for about 15 to 30 minutes. Then I rolled it into little ropes, cut my little bites, and then they went into my water with some baking soda. After 10 to 15 seconds, I popped them on the baking sheet, sprinkled them with salt, and then baked them until they were golden brown. When it was time to bake my little brioche burger buns, I topped them with my egg wash and some sesame seeds. And once they were all baked, I let them cool completely. And then I moved on to my chicken wings. I covered them in seasoning and then popped them in the oven for about an hour while I made a little side salad. I wanted something refreshing to cut through all my other flavors, so I decided to make a blood orange fennel salad with a mustard vinaigrette. I set that aside while I started on my patties. I wanted to keep them simple, so I made a cilantro cumin patty with some caramelized onion cheddar on top. I cut my buns in half, put the patty on top, and assembled my burger with some arugula, pickled cabbage, and you cannot forget crispy onions. Then I doused my wings in my buffalo sauce I made, added some parsley, also made a white cheddar sauce for my pretzel bites, and this spread was gone in an hour and a half. I asked my husband what he wanted for Valentine's Day dinner, and he said steak and chimichurri, so I put him on steak duty while I started all the other stuff. One of his favorite sauces is chimichurri, so I got started on chopping up some cilantro really finely and then moved on to my parsley. I like to take a good amount of the stems off, and then I diced up some garlic, chili, and shallot. I added that to the bowl with my cilantro and parsley, a squeeze of lemon juice, some olive oil, and red wine vinegar, also a lot of salt. Gave that a really good mix and let that sit while he started washing the potatoes. Lucky can get really specific in his shapes and cuts, so I decided that he was just in charge of cutting up all of our fries to get them really uniform. She did a really good job at, while I made us an elderberry lime mocktail. Then he questioned me putting the potatoes in ice water, but did it anyways, and I prepped some garlic for the broccolini. We put all of our food prep out, and then he dried off the potato. We're double frying our fries today, so I gave them their first fry, set them aside on a wire rack. Lucky got started on our steaks. He is always in charge of steaks, and he also reverse seasons them. But while those were resting, I sauteed some broccolini and some mushrooms in a ponzu sauce. And then once our steak was done resting, I put our fries back in the oil to get them nice and golden. I also did this in batches just to not overcrowd my pot. And then once they were done, I sprinkled them with some sea salt, and then it was time to plate. Put our fries down, broccolini, steak, and then topped it with chimichurri, and Lucky said this was a 10 out of 10, so he had to have another plate after this. I don't like a lot of baked desserts. I don't like cakes, the cookies, the cupcakes, but I do love a really good pavlova, and today I was craving one, so that's exactly what I made. I started by separating my egg whites from my yolks and whipping those up and slowly incorporating sugar into that mixture until it got to the consistency I wanted. I pulled at my whisk and I knew it was ready when I saw the stiff peaks form. Then I put in some powdered sugar and some vanilla. Once that was all incorporated, I scooped my meringue onto my baking sheet and created little wells in the middle. Then I let those bake for about an hour and a half and let them cool for another hour in the oven. In the meantime, I made a little peach puree. I just let my peaches boil on the stove with some maple syrup and some lemon, and then blended it all up. The combination of peach and passion fruit is so good, so I added some passion fruit to my peach puree and then moved on to making my whipped cream. I was feeling girly today, so I made it pink, and then decided to assemble my little pavlovas. I washed and cut all of my berries, and then it was time to assemble, so I took my meringue, spooned the whipped cream into the wells we created, topped it with the passion fruit peach puree and all of the berries. I also added some mint to it. The consistency of these was divine. My husband was on his way out to get a cookies and cream soft serve, but I told him I'll just make it for him instead, so that's exactly what I did. I started by making my Oreos by combining some flour, cocoa powder, butter, some sugar, and egg, and then letting that go until it all comes together. Then I grabbed a baking sheet that was lined with parchment paper and formed little balls that I spaced evenly onto it. I ended up making 2 baking sheets, and once the balls were formed, I used my palm to flatten them out. I put them in the fridge for about 10 minutes and then popped them in the oven for 10 minutes. And while those cooled, I got started on my filling, which was just butter, vanilla, and some powdered sugar. I beat that until it was light and fluffy, and then transferred it over to a little Ziploc bag because I didn't have a piping bag. The filling was so delicious, I kept snacking on it while I was filling my Oreos. After spreading an even layer on one of the cookies, I put another one on top, and there you go. I put some of them aside and then used the rest for my soft serve ice cream. I did a mix of cookies without filling and with filling. For my ice cream, I combined some milk, heavy cream, some sugar, some salt, and vanilla. Put that in my KitchenAid and let that churn until it reached the consistency I wanted. Then I put all of my Oreo cookies in there, let it go for another 5 to 10 minutes, and then it had the perfect soft serve consistency. I spooned it into my little ramekin, topped it with some more Oreo cookies, and I could not resist having a bowl myself, and it was really good. These are some things I prepped to make my week just a little bit easier. I started off by making a blueberry lemon loaf. So I took some Greek yogurt, zested my lemon, added some honey as my sweetener, some eggs to my liquid batter, and then added that to my dry batter, gave it a good mix, added some blueberries, and popped that in the oven. Once that was done, I let that cool while I started on my pickles. I was doing 2 different pickles. I was doing a classic cucumber pickle with some garlic, bay leaves, dill, and then I also decided to just do my classic pickled onion that I do almost every week. I topped that with some peppercorn and then my vinegar mixture, closed my jar ups, and set those aside while I started on my granola bars. My kids are obsessed with these. I combine some honey with peanut butter and then add my oats and whatever toppings you like. I opted for white chocolate chips, some dried cranberries, some chia seeds, and flax seeds. I put those in the fridge for about an hour before slicing them up, and then I got started on my salad for the week. This week I wanted to go for something that is super filling but stores well, so I did some quinoa, kale, carrots, some feta, some cucumber, and topped that with a miso lemon dressing. I like prepping one hot meal a week just because I don't like eating the same meals over and over again, so I just do one hot meal, which this week was yaki udon. So we had some wagyu lying around. I added that to the pan, gave that a saute, pulled that out, and then sauteed all of my vegetables. Once those were done, I added my noodles and my sauce, gave that a really good mix, and it was done. I like storing all of my food in glass containers if I can, so I put my granola bars back in the fridge, packed away my salad, and then moved on to my noodles. I didn't put the lid on because they were still pretty hot, and this wraps up my meal prep. Today is my husband and I's 4th wedding anniversary, so I decided to wake up super early and make some bagels and cream cheese from scratch. I started by making my bagel dough by combining warm water with yeast, adding some flour, brown sugar, and salt. I kneaded that in my mixer until it came together, and then I turned it out and kneaded it by hand for another 6 to 8 minutes. Once that was soft to the touch, I put it in my oiled bowl and covered it with a shower cap and a kitchen towel. Then I got started on making my cream cheese, so I added some whole milk to my pot with some lemon juice and let that go until it curdled. Once all the whey was separated, I poured it into my strainer, lined with a cheesecloth, and let that cool, and then pressed out all the liquid, added that to my food processor and let that go until it was smooth. In the meantime, I pulled my garlic out of the oven, let that cool while I sliced up some chives, and added both of those things to my cream cheese with a good pinch of salt and some of that olive oil. By this point, my dough was almost double in size, so I cut it into 8 pieces and formed those into little balls before poking a little hole in them and stretching that out to resemble a bagel. I repeated that process with all 8 pieces and then covered those while I prepped my honey and water. Had all of my toppings laying out, and then the bagels went in the water for about a minute on each side before I put them on my parchment paper. I brushed some egg wash on them and then layered my toppings on. So I did a few different ones: sesame, smoked sea salt, cheddar, and Fresno chili. I baked those for about 25 minutes and they came out looking so perfect. Lucky always needs his toasted, so he did that and he gave them a 10 out of 10, which is very rare. So I was very pleased with that. And then I made mine with my roasted garlic and chive cream cheese and the pickles I made the other day. At this point, Lucky's already had 3 bagels, so I would say he enjoyed it. When I asked my toddlers what they wanted for lunch, they both wanted a grilled cheese. So that's exactly what I got started on. I got started by making my bread. This is a really simple no-knead recipe. You put all of your dry and wet ingredients into a bowl, give it a mix, and let it rise for 2 hours, which gives me enough time to start making my cheese. I combined some milk, citric acid, and rennet in my pot. Let that heat up, and then once it's solidified, I'd return it back to the heat and stir it gently before letting all the curds drain and then stretching it out. Stretch it until it's shiny and smooth, and then put it back into that cooled whey. The kids love pesto, so I made a fresh basil pesto by putting some basil, pine nuts, some garlic, a splash of lemon juice, into my food processor and blitzing it while slowly adding some olive oil, and then I finished it off with some Parmesan cheese. I set that aside and got my bread out. I scooped it onto my floured surface and gently formed it into a ball. It does not have to be perfect whatsoever, and then transferred it over to my parchment before letting it bake in my Dutch oven for about 30 minutes. You need butter on your grilled cheese, so I made a garlic and herb butter by whipping some heavy cream until it separated, pressing out all the buttermilk, and then combining it with my garlic, herbs, and some flaky sea salt. I wrapped it up in some wax paper and let that chill in the fridge while I pulled out my bread and let that cool for a little bit. We like thick slices of bread in this house, so I cut 2 thick slices of bread, sliced up my mozzarella, and then spread some of that butter on my bread, pesto on top, layered on the mozzarella, added some more pesto on the other side, and also butter on the outside of the bread so it could get really crispy in the pan. I pull it out once it's crisp and the cheese has melted, and the kids absolutely devoured this. All I've been craving is buffalo wings with homemade ranch. And yes, I've had this meal more than I should have in the past week, but here we are making it again. I know it's controversial, but you don't have to wash your chicken. It's a preference thing, so do whatever you want. I patted my wings dry and then added some cornstarch and whatever seasoning your heart desires. I do smoked paprika, garlic powder, Cajun seasoning, and then I let those hang out on my wire rack for at least 30 minutes. In the meantime, I make my ranch with some mayo, sour cream, buttermilk. You can also use regular milk, some dill. Can't forget the parsley and chives, squeeze of lemon, and then I season it with some salt and pepper. Usually I bake my wings, but today my husband wanted them fried, so I did that. I fried them off in batches and did a double fry just to get them really nice and crispy. Once those were done, I melted some butter in my pot, added my favorite hot sauce, some honey, and let that simmer for a little bit just to thicken up. When it was time to coat the wings, I put them in a big metal bowl, poured my sauce over, but also reserved some on the side just to drizzle on top, gave that a really good toss. Put all of them on my big serving plate, and I like to top them with either cilantro, parsley, or spring onion. Today we did spring onion. Can't forget about the ranch I made. And the ratio of wing to ranch is very important, but these were so good that I'll probably be making them again tomorrow. These are the things I prepped to make my week just a little bit easier. This week I started off by making some Cheez-Its. I combined all of my ingredients and then let the dough rest in the fridge. My bananas weren't as ripe as I wanted them, so I popped them in the oven to ripen and then got started on making a chocolate banana bread this week. I usually make a loaf a week because it's so easy and quick to make and everyone loves it. Then I boiled my chickpeas for the hummus I was going to make later while I prepped a cucumber and herb salad. I chopped all my ingredients really fine, added some feta, and did a really classic olive oil lemon vinaigrette. This goes well on everything. Then I moved on to making Moroccan meatballs. For the protein, I used some ground beef, and do not forget to put cinnamon in your meatballs. I promise, it's so good. I pulled my Cheez-It dough out of the fridge and sliced it into little squares or rectangles. Then I put holes in them, popped them in the oven, and once they were done, I let them cool while I made my hummus. I went for a cilantro garlic hummus this time round. My husband wanted different types of proteins prepped, so I made a quick teriyaki sauce to make teriyaki chicken. I let that thicken up on the stove while I sliced up some apples for my kids and also some broccoli just to have it handy. And then it was time to put everything away. I put away my hummus and moved on to my salad. I like making smaller quantities of things just because I get over the flavors really quickly. Put away my Cheez-Its, then moved on to my broccoli and apples. I also put some lemon juice on my apples to keep them from browning, my teriyaki chicken, and that same morning I started making some Korean shredded beef in my crock pot, so I put that away as well since that was done. This is so versatile. I put it on sandwiches, rice, tortillas, anything. And that wraps up my meal prep for this week. I don't put my banana bread in a separate container because it's usually gone in 2 to 3 days anyways. Today my toddlers wanted cereal for breakfast again, so I decided to make some Cinnamon Toast Crunch since that's my husband's favorite cereal and the kids have never had it. So I combine all of my dry ingredients into a bowl, give that a really good mix, and then slowly add some oil and water. I incorporate everything with my spatula and then move on to using my hands. Then I add in the cinnamon and make sure it's incorporated before putting my dough on some parchment paper. I use another sheet of parchment paper on top and roll it out as thin as I can. Once it's rolled out, I'm using a pizza cutter to just cut it into squares or rectangles. You can do it in whatever shape you want. I ended up making 2 batches, sprinkled it with some sweetener. You can use sugar. I used monk fruit sweetener. I put it on my parchment paper and baked it in the oven at 350 for about 10 minutes before I turned it down to 250 and baked it for another 35. I pulled it out the oven, let it cool, and then broke the squares apart before adding them to bowls with some milk. And this is now a favorite in our house. My husband grew up eating Pop-Tarts and toaster strudels, and this morning he was craving them, so I decided to make him a hybrid out of both a Pop-Tart and a toaster strudel. I started by adding my dry ingredients into a food processor and slowly dropping in some cold butter. I let that go until it resembled the size of pebbles. For my dry ingredients, I whisked up an egg, added a splash of milk, made sure that was all combined before I added that to my dry mixture. It was a lot easier plopping it on a work surface and kneading it for a little bit, so that's what I did before I wrapped it up in cling film and put it in the fridge while I got started on my filling. I was debating between raspberries and strawberries, but strawberries won, so I added them to a pot with some honey and lemon. When they were cooked down, I blended them up, added some cornstarch, and let that thicken before putting that in the fridge to cool. In the meantime, I rolled out my dough and cut it into 6 pieces. I wanted them a little bit smaller than usual, so I did that before spreading some of the strawberry filling on top. Then I placed a second piece of dough on top of that before using a fork to seal the edges and poke some holes in the top. I let them bake for about 30 minutes and then pulled them out and let them cool while I started on my glaze. He loves lemon, so I decided to go with a lemon glaze for these. I didn't want it really thick, so I decided to make it a little bit thinner, and they were done. Lucky walked in at the perfect time to try these, and he absolutely loved them. I'd never had a Pop-Tart or toaster strudel before, but these were really good.